The world had already ended long before anyone fully understood why. Cities fell silent, power grids shut down, and survivors hid in the ruins of what once was normal life. The monsters that had arrived weren't like anything humanity had seen before. They weren't here to feed on flesh in the ordinary sense. They were hunters of sound. They came fast, from the skies or perhaps the depths of the earth. No one knew. They were blind, but perfect in their ability to detect the faintest vibration in the air. The scrape of a shoe, the slam of a door, even the click of a toy could mean immediate death. Amid the chaos, one family endured. The Abbotts. They had carved out a fragile existence on a small farm deep in the countryside. Every day was a ritual of silence. They padded their pathways with sand so no footstep would betray them. They spoke in whispers of sign language, each gesture carrying the weight of survival. The parents, Lee and Evelyn, had built this way of life for their children. Thank Reagan, their eldest daughter who wore the burden of responsibility heavily on her shoulders. Marcus, their nervous and fearful son. And Bo, their youngest, whose innocence was both a blessing and a curse in this merciless world. The rules were simple: never speak, never drop anything, never cry out, and above all, never make noise. On day 89, they ventured into a desolate town, its shops stripped bare, cars rusting in silence. They scavenged for medicine, supplies, anything that could keep them alive. The children moved carefully under their father's watchful eyes, learning the deadly importance of silence with every step. But Bo, too young to understand the depth of danger, found a small toy spaceship in the abandoned store. His father quickly removed the batteries, shaking his head. The toy was a death trap. Noise meant doom. Regan, his older sister, feeling pity for his disappointed expression, quietly returned the toy to him without the batteries. She thought she was giving him a harmless comfort. She thought it would be safe. But children are curious, and even in the silence of the apocalypse, hope shines in the small glow of imagination. The Abbotts walked in single file down the sandy path back to the farm. The air was still. The only sound was the rustle of the wind through the trees. Evelyn walked close behind her children, scanning the woods with a mother's sharp instinct. Lee, ever vigilant, led the way. For a brief moment, there was peace. And then it happened. Bo, lagging behind, had found the batteries. With the innocence of a child, he placed them back into the toy. A loud electronic whir filled the air, breaking the fragile silence. The sound echoed like a death sentence. Lee's time had passed, but grief never loosened its grip. Nearly a year later, the Abbotts were still living with the heavy memory of Bo's loss. Silence had become not just a rule but a religion, an unbreakable commandment carved into their very souls. The farmhouse had transformed into a fortress. Lee had strung up warning lights across the property, white for safety, red for danger. He had mapped out safe zones with sand and paths leading to hidden cellars. Every move was calculated, every object carefully placed so it would not fall, roll, or make noise. But survival was not just about food or shelter. It was about love, about family, and Evelyn was now heavily pregnant. The unspoken truth hung over them. A baby was a life to celebrate, but also a threat. How do you silence the cries of a newborn in a world that punishes sound? Lee had become more than a father. He was the guardian of silence. He spent his days trying to prepare, building soundproof spaces, studying the creatures from fragments of news clippings pinned to his basement walls. Every headline screamed the same thing. They hear you. They hunt you. At night, he climbed to the top of his silo and lit a fire, scanning the horizon for other survivors. In the distance, faint flames sometimes flickered back. Proof that they were not alone. Proof that other families too were clinging to life in silence. But inside, Lee carried a guilt so heavy it made his shoulders bow. He could not save Bo, and though he never said it, he felt his daughter blamed him as much as he blamed himself. Reagan, now older, was a storm of emotions. Deaf since birth, she communicated in sign language fluently, but she felt cut off in more ways than one. She believed her father resented her for Bo's death, that maybe, if she had not given him the toy, he would still be alive. Lee worked tirelessly on her cochlear implant, crafting small devices in hopes of restoring her hearing. But every attempt seemed to fail. Reagan saw his efforts as pity, not love. To her, silence wasn't just survival, it was a prison. One evening, after an argument in Sign, she stormed away from the table, her eyes burning with tears she could not voice. Marcus, the middle child, had grown cautious, too cautious. He feared everything, every step outside the safety of the house. While his father tried to toughen him, teaching him to fish and set traps, Marcus shook with fear at the very thought of leaving the farmhouse. To Lee, this was unacceptable. His children needed to be strong. They needed to survive without him if the time came. So one afternoon, he led Marcus into the woods to show him the river. There, the water roared loudly over rocks. For the first time, Marcus realized sound could exist without danger. The constant rushing of the river masked their voices. Here, they could whisper, even speak softly. Lee knelt beside his son and spoke words that carried more weight than any weapon. As long as there are louder sounds around you, they won't hear you. For Marcus, this was both comfort and terror. He realized survival was not just silence. It was understanding the balance of sound.
Back at the farmhouse, Evelyn prepared for the baby. She had carefully constructed a soundproof box lined with soft cloth, complete with an oxygen mask, a crib that looked more like a coffin, designed to keep the child silent and hidden when it cried. But Evelyn's heart was heavy. No mother should have to silence her child this way. She prayed every night, tears falling silently onto her swollen belly, hoping the world would never hear her baby's first cries. And then, one evening, as the family settled into their silent routine, Evelyn's contractions began. The pain surged through her body, and she knew the moment they had been dreading was here. With trembling hands, she switched the farmhouse lights from white to red. A signal. A warning. A desperate cry without sound. They are coming. The pain tore through Evelyn's body like fire. She clutched the rail of the staircase, every muscle in her face fighting the urge to scream. Outside, the red lights glowed in the night like bleeding stars. Lee and the children were not yet home. Evelyn was alone. She moved carefully, every step deliberate, suppressing the cries that threatened to escape her throat. The world outside was no longer safe, and now her home was not either. From the shadows of the cornfield, the monsters stirred. Drawn by the faint shuffle of her movement, their armored limbs tore against the soil as they crept closer. Their grotesque heads tilted, listening, waiting. Evelyn made her way to the bathtub, sweat dripping from her pale skin. The contractions grew sharper, waves of agony pushing her closer to the breaking point. Her hands gripped her swollen belly, her teeth clenched so tight they could shatter. And then, the floorboard creaked. The sound echoed like thunder in her ears. Her body froze in terror as she heard it. The shrill, metallic scream of the creature as it burst into the house. It moved with terrifying speed, its armored limbs scraping the walls, its head twitching violently as it scanned the vibrations of the air. Evelyn pressed her hand against her mouth, blood from her bitten lips seeping between her fingers. The creature drew closer, its claws slashing across furniture, tearing through the silence. Evelyn knew she couldn't stay still. With all the strength left in her, she dragged herself up the stairs, her body trembling from both pain and fear. The bathtub awaited her, the only place she could collapse without collapsing hope. Her contractions intensified, her vision blurred. The creature's screeches reverberated through the house, rattling the walls as it searched. Finally, her body surrendered. The baby came, her screams swallowed by the roar of fireworks exploding outside. Lee's desperate plan to distract the monsters. The child's first cries filled the air, but in that exact moment, the monsters turned away, chasing the louder noise beyond the farm. Evelyn clutched her newborn tightly, tears streaming down her face. She had done the impossible. She had given birth in silence. Meanwhile, Lee, Regan, and Marcus had returned from the woods. From a distance, Lee's eyes widened at the glowing red lights across his home. Panic surged through him as he sprinted toward the farmhouse, the children struggling to keep up. He knew what it meant. Evelyn was in labor. The creatures were inside. Every second was a race against death. The fireworks, a carefully prepared distraction, erupted in the sky, their thunder masking the newborn's cries. But Lee knew it wouldn't last. Noise only bought time. He guided his children into the grain silo to hide, his heart torn between protecting them and saving Evelyn. But even as he closed the hatch, he could see the fear etched into Regan's face, the guilt that never left her eyes, the fragile courage in Marcus's trembling hands. They were children. And yet in this world, they were soldiers. Inside the grain silo, Marcus and Regan found themselves cornered. One of the creatures, evading the fireworks, had found them. Its claws shredded through the metal walls, its screech deafening even without sound. In the panic, Marcus fell, knocking a latch loose. A torrent of corn poured in, swallowing them in a suffocating wave. The children screamed, and though muffled, the vibrations drew the monster closer. It thrashed against the silo, tearing through the grain. Regan, desperate, clutched her broken hearing aid. She pressed it to her ear, unaware of what was about to happen. A piercing feedback erupted from the device. Not sound as humans know it, but a shrill vibration, high-pitched and cutting. The creature reeled back violently, its armored head splitting open as it shrieked in agony. It stumbled, its limbs spasming. For the first time, the children saw it vulnerable. The feedback stopped. The creature shook off its pain and charged again, but the seed of discovery had been planted. Outside, chaos consumed the farm. Evelyn hid with the newborn in the basement, tears dripping silently as she prayed for her family to return. Lee, hearing the creature's shrieks from the silo, charged to his children's aid. He reached them in time, pulling them free, but the monster was relentless. It had locked onto them. There was no escape. Lee looked at his children, his face carved with love and finality. Regan's eyes locked onto his. She signed with trembling hands, "It was my fault." He shook his head slowly. Then, with a small smile, he signed back, "I love you. I have always loved you." And with that, he turned to face the monster. His chest heaved, his voice broke the silence. For the first time in over a year, he screamed. The monster lunged at him instantly, tearing him apart with unrelenting force. But in that sacrifice, Lee bought his children the chance to escape. Silence fell over the farm once more, but it was a silence soaked in grief. Lee's scream had been the last sound his children ever heard from him. His body was gone, taken in a blur of claws and blood, leaving only the memory of his love and the echo of his sacrifice. Regan and Marcus staggered back to the farmhouse, their faces pale with shock. Evelyn met them at the door, the newborn pressed to her chest, her eyes instantly searching for Lee. But she didn't need to ask. She knew. Her tears glistened in the dim light, but there was no time to mourn. The monsters had not left. The noise of fireworks had long faded, and the air was again filled with the hungry silence of predators hunting in the dark. They retreated to the basement, the one place Lee had spent countless hours preparing. Maps, radios, and scribbled notes covered the walls, each one a desperate attempt to outthink the monsters. Evelyn placed the baby in the soundproof box, securing the tiny oxygen mask over its face. She kissed its forehead softly, then turned to her older children. Her strength was fragile but unbroken. She could not let them see her despair. Regan, however, carried something new inside her. Not just grief, but knowledge. She held her broken cochlear implant, remembering how the creature had reacted in the silo. Could this small device, this failed invention of her father's love, be their salvation? The house groaned under the weight of approaching death. One of the creatures had followed them into the basement, its massive body twisting through the doorway, its claws scraping concrete. The family froze. The baby squirmed in the box, muffled cries barely contained by the oxygen mask. Marcus clutched his mother's hand, trembling. Evelyn tightened her grip on the shotgun, her heart hammering in her chest. The creature drew closer, its grotesque face splitting open in a grotesque bloom of armor plates, exposing a glistening core. Its ears, if they could be called that, pulsed with anticipation as it sensed vibrations in the room. Then, Regan stepped forward. Shaking hands, Regan pressed the implant to a microphone connected to Lee's radio system. The feedback screeched through the speakers, high-pitched, violent, unbearable. The creature shrieked, its body convulsing as it clawed at its own head. Its armor cracked, plates peeling away to reveal the soft, vulnerable flesh beneath it. For the first time, they saw the monster weaken. For the first time, they saw hope. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She raised the shotgun, her eyes burning with fury. With a thunderous blast, the creature's head exploded, its body collapsing in the basement with a sickening thud. The silence that followed was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of triumph. But the victory was short-lived. Through the basement's old television monitors, they saw them. More creatures, drawn by the sound of the gunshot, racing across the fields toward the farmhouse. Dozens of them. Evelyn's face hardened. She looked at her children, at her baby, and then at the hearing aid in Regan's trembling hand. They had found a weakness. They had found a way to fight. She cocked the shotgun, the steel click echoing louder than any words. Beside her, Regan adjusted the implant, determination carving strength into her young face. They were no longer prey. They were ready for war. The world of A Quiet Place is not just about monsters. It's about family, about sacrifice, guilt, and the desperate fight for survival in a place where even your voice can betray you. Lee's death was not in vain. His love lived on in his daughter's discovery, in his wife's courage, and in the strength of his children. In silence, they found despair. But in silence, they also found power. And in that final moment, the Abbotts were no longer hiding. They were ready to fight. Subscribe